Hello, and welcome to the Migraine Oasis podcast, where we'll help you achieve more pain-free days by tackling the root causes that keep you stuck in the pain cycle. Our goal is to help you heal from the inside out for sustainable results. We'll cover everything you need for a holistic and mind-body approach to healing. From understanding how pain works to uncovering areas of tension within the mind, body, and spirit that can trigger your pain, and sharing practical tips to break free and find relief. I'm your host, Karen Ash, a former chronic migraine sufferer, certified coach, patient advocate, and migraine mentor here to support your healing journey. If you're ready to change your relationship with migraine and get back to living, let's dive in.
I have Sally Tether with me again today, which I'm thrilled at, my co-partner in this cure for migraine and finding migraine relief. What we wanted to talk about is triggers, because when you have migraines, I think we all think that we have one or more triggers, and we're so convinced that those triggers are what's causing the pain. There's a different approach that Sally and I have learned that we want to talk about because it was revolutionary to me. It was life-changing once I started looking at triggers in a different way. Sally, I just wanted to start by just talking about what our triggers were. Environment. People think that it's weather or strong smells or heat and humidity, glare, loud sounds, all those kind of things. Did you ever have any of those environmental things that you felt were your triggers?
Sun and sunlight was a huge one for me. And I have to say, I still wear my hat all the time when I go for a walk, whether I need to or not, or it's just a huge habit that I've got into. I would never be that bad with a storm. Some people say there's a storm coming and that's going to affect me. That I never sort of got to that. But I remember if I used to go walking on a windy day, and then if I would get a migraine, I'd say, oh, it's because it was windy and the weather wasn't great. I'd find a reason like that. And then I thought, oh, I better not go when it's windy again. But not so much with a storm, but definitely sunlight. I never sat in the sun or wanted the sun on my head at all. So yeah, those are the environmental ones. So
I think you had mentioned to me too, right? When you got really hot, you felt like that was...
Oh, yeah. If I would get too hot, that would definitely set me off.
I was thinking from the barometric pressure in these storms, at one point I ended up on one of the apps that I was tracking my migraines, which I don't do anymore. That's a whole other topic. I got the paid prescription to this app because it would show the barometric pressure on every given day. I was so obsessed that I would actually even be looking at, oh no, there's a change. It says that it's going to be a variable. So I would get myself all upset. Now I just don't even look at that. I'm in Florida. Speaking of the barometric pressure, we just had a hurricane and I did have a slight headache the next day. And I thought, oh, isn't that funny? But there was so much emotional dysregulation around that time of the worry and the stress of everything and preparing and the news cycle and all these different things. So I very quickly switched my head, like, not the barometric pressure. And if it was, I would have had a raging migraine because that was a huge weather front. So that's the environmental things. Another one is hormones. Right before my menstrual cycle, I would always get a migraine. And a lot of people feel like this is one of their triggers. Did you ever have this one?
Oh, yeah, most of the time. Sometimes it was before my cycle, sometimes it was during, sometimes it was after, sometimes it was all the way through and during and before and after. And I was convinced that it was such a huge factor for me. So I actually had a hysterectomy because of it.
I did not know that.
That's so sad. Yeah, I was convinced that was the case and that it was going to help. But unfortunately, as soon as I had my hysterectomy, things got a whole lot worse. So that was not the answer, which I now know. But at the time, it was funny because I've been having this treatment from a gynecologist and she was giving me these injections to stop my cycle to see if that would help. And it was a bit better, but it might have been that my brain felt safe. And so I was like, see, it's so much better. It's so much better. To try and convince her that I should have a hysterectomy. She said, look, that's not enough evidence. The only way we can do a hysterectomy is if you've got other gynecological problems. I said, have you got prolapse? And she said, how come you've never mentioned to me before? And I said, because I don't care about that. It's my head that I want to sort out. I'm literally at my wit's end here. And so she examined me and she said, I can't believe that you've never mentioned, because it was quite bad. And she said, yeah, I can put you in for hysterectomy on the grounds of your prolapse, but not because of your migraine. So I was just like, yes, this is amazing news. This is going to be the answer to all my problems. No, it was not. So hormones for me, I thought, were huge. Absolutely huge. I think the hysterectomy made me a whole lot worse. Oh, no.
So Sally and I actually got cut off at this point because I am in Florida and we just had Hurricane Milton. So the power and the internet were cutting in and out. So I'll get back to what we were talking about and I kind of give a recap. And this is why this is kind of a little bit splotchy in the middle here. But as I was editing, I started thinking about the extreme measures that she went to because she thought her trigger was real with these hormones. And I started thinking about one of my examples that didn't come up on this episode was my teeth, the amalgam within my teeth, all the fillings I had read at one point were potentially a problem for headaches or migraines. So I went to the extreme of getting all of my fillings replaced. And it did nothing for me. It's just one more of the examples of the lengths we go to get out of pain and the things that we restrict in our lives, the desperations that we go to figure out what is causing it. And I hope this episode is going to help you learn that there are things going on internally and deeper root causes, I guess you would say, and some tips on how to correct that. So let's get back to the episode.
Well, we're talking about all these triggers that people are convinced that we have with migraines. And we started talking about the environmental ones where it's like a strong smell or heat or humidity. And we were talking about those. And then we got to hormones, and you had mentioned this was a problem for you as well as it was for me. And we had gotten to the point where you had talked about having a hysterectomy and thinking that was going to be the cure. Unbelievable when you convince yourself, you're so convinced that is it. But you've just mentioned the smells, and that was a huge one for me. That would stop me going to places. And if I went to my mum's, she'd have the things with the smelly things in the room. She'd have 3 or 4 of them, and I could smell. It was like my whole senses were heightened. And hand wash, perfume, and to the point of I had to ask my clients not to wear perfume, some of them. You
Yes,
found what?
I know I would get really mad on the tram, or if somebody on the airplane one time, somebody put perfume on and I was livid. Like, it's a closed environment. Why would you put perfume on? And I was convinced you're giving me a migraine now. Or somebody would wear really heavy perfume and I would smell it on the tram and I'd be so mad. And I mean, now looking back, that anger and that frustration and everything was what was kicking off the problem for me. But yeah, I was convinced also. I didn't wear perfume for, I would say, 34 years since I started getting the migraine. Yeah, I was convinced that I could not wear perfume.
Is the expectation of the fact that that's just going to do that now. I'm definitely going to end up. The worst time of that was when I was on a cruise and someone gave me the wrong drink and I literally had a sip of it. And I said, well, I'm going to have a migraine in a minute. Within about 60 seconds, I had to go back to the realm. But when you think about it, it can't possibly work that quick, can it?
No.
So, but at the time, I was so angry with this waiter. I was going to complain about him and get him struck up. I was so upset and frustrated. And
yeah, we're talking about the triggers and what we had experienced. I wanted to go through some of them because I think people will really resonate with the things that we're talking about. But as we're talking, we're scattering in a little bit of our new approach. And what we've learned is that the actual fear of the trigger, the actual anxiety it's causing, or the anticipation of it is part of what is causing the actual problem, because it's dysregulating the system. It's causing this pain fear cycle. It's sending unsafe messages to the brain, all these different things. So we'll get into that in a little bit. I just want to keep going over some of these triggers because it's so interesting to look back on it and hear what yours were and what mine were and just how convinced that we really were. And a lot of people still are that this is the problem. We're here to say there's a deeper root cause, but let's keep going. So there's other things like foods that we were convinced were, or I'm asking you, I guess. I was convinced anyway. So I wasn't eating things like aged cheese, processed meats, red wine, for sure not. Not a second glass of wine because that was automatically going to cause my migraine. I got to the point where I had heard cucumbers, tomatoes, something like that. I started avoiding so many foods and had such a restricted diet. It was crazy. Now I'm eating everything. I don't even think about it anymore. And it's not causing me a problem. So what were some of your food things that you had avoided?
Well, going back 20 odd years, I went to see a kinesiologist and she used to do regular testing on me. She used to test me with all these foods. I would be avoiding what she told me to avoid, and it would change monthly. I was obsessed with going to her and finding out what I can and can't. I'd have lists of what I could have, what I couldn't have, and it would change. She said, "Oh, you're okay with that now. You can introduce that back in, but I would be careful with this." They're not allergies, they're intolerances, something that my body doesn't like at that time. But because my body was, or my brain was so hypersensitive, there'd be so many things to avoid. I mean, I avoided dairy. At some point, I avoided all wheat and yeast. So it was restricting myself, going out for dinner. I was checking the menu. It just wasn't a relaxing, enjoyable thing to do, to go to someone's house. Has that got that in it? Has it got this in it? And it was just so stressful for people as well as me, because they think, oh, no, Sally's coming round. God knows what we're going to give her.
Well, that's the thing. You think about if it's an actual trigger and it is, say, I don't know, red wine, that would mean that every single time you have red wine, it wouldn't come and go as a problem. It would be every time. That would be your trigger. Why would it change?
I've
So there's
avoided alcohol, all coffees anyway. And weirdly enough, I still do. So there's some things I still don't have, which is bizarre because of everything else. But I still have never had fresh orange juice. I don't have a lot of alcohol. On holiday, I might have a cocktail or something, but I've never gone back to wine because I think I had some of my really bad episodes with that. So it's a little bit of a barrier for me.
Yeah, it's almost like we've got this PTSD thing going on that, like, you know, the new way and the new approach, and you know it's working, but then there's these little things. I think it's habit too. I mean, like I said, 34 years I was avoiding some of this stuff. So to even spray the perfume on, the act of actually smelling that during the day and not having that like reaction, that's 34 years of programming that we're trying to reverse. You know what I mean? So it's a lot. And just hearing you talk about the food and then going to a restaurant and how restrictive it was and so much angst around the whole thing. Now I think the key is the approach is so much looser that you might not have the wine, but it's not this, oh, I can't have it, that dysregulation of the nervous system. It's more easy, like, okay, I'm just not going to go there. It's not as big of a deal, I guess you would say. Is that
No,
true?
absolutely not. No. The thing is, I think with chronic migraine is as you progress through it, you get more and more triggers as you go on. And I did bring this up with my neurologist and I said, I've got so many triggers. And he said, well, unfortunately, the cortex of your brain is hypersensitive. So I believed that, but honestly believed that the cortex of my brain was so sensitive. And that's why I had all these triggers. It got to the stage where I couldn't travel really without getting a migraine. Yeah, certainly an aeroplane and a long journey in the car, train, anything. Any overstimulation, almost like even excitement of looking forward to an event. There were so many different triggers. And I said, oh, well, I better not go out anymore then, because every time I plan to go out, that's what happens. And that's no way to live, is it?
It's
and
very
another
restrictive. Yeah.
I mean, I could go for a walk and I'd be okay. But if I did any other form of exercise where my heart rate rise up, I used to run, that would just cause it. But now I'm going to the gym, swimming, I'm doing all sorts of exercise. So that wasn't a trigger, but obviously I believed so strongly that it was. I must admit, when found out about this, I listened to a podcast about you can do this, you can do that. And I suddenly thought, oh, okay, so I can do all these things then. It's nothing to do with that. Some of the things I introduced back in without any anxiety at all. I was like, oh, I can do that then, that's fine. And some of the others, it had to be done in a more gradual way, more like the graded exposure, just doing a little bit at a time and just teaching your brain that, yeah, we're safe here, we're okay. Yeah.
Let's talk about how to experiment and all that in a little bit at the end of giving people some tools then to use. Back to the triggers. So some of the things I guess we've talked about, like in the sleep patterns, this was a big one. I just had a situation when I'm in the middle of this hurricane. My sleep was horrible. I hadn't hydrated. The barometric pressure was crazy. I was in my family environment with my parents in a very small confined room that was just bringing up all kinds of other family dynamics. I had, so stress, is going on. I have every single trigger that could possibly be. And the next day was no problem. The following day was a little bit of a dull headache. And it was just like, oh my gosh, I think the release of, okay, there was no big damage from that hurricane. We're trying to pick ourselves back up and try to move on with life. But yeah, so if these triggers were actually triggers, I would have just been in bed all day for days because there were so many of them coming at the same time. I look at that and I was kind of amazed, like, oh my gosh, how far I've come. I would have been so scared of so many things leading up to that I would have been in bed for sure. My nervous system would have been all dysregulated and all stressed. We've talked about a lot. I think everybody on the line would probably understand what their triggers are. We probably did go over some of them, but what I want to do now is just talk about this other way of viewing it. And I'm just curious where you first learned that a trigger might be something coming from something different. There might be a different root cause of the trigger.
Probably on the Curable app. Actually, I did take the migraine deep dive that Nicole Sachs did. 2 hours of it was a workshop specifically migraine sufferers. I did take that. But I'd already worked out by then that, so I might not have to avoid all this then.
Or how it was explained?
No, I actually don't. I just remember finding out and it made so much sense to me. Like, my brain's been so scared of all these things. And now it doesn't have to be. It's up to me to calm my brain down and teach my nervous system that these things are not unsafe. Can't remember the specific time I worked that one out, but I went through the Curable app and the course, and I can't remember the actual time.
Why I asked you is because I honestly don't remember where I first heard this concept. I think honestly, I put 2 and 2 together because all the information I was finding out there was about chronic pain. They were saying different things about back pain or stomach aches and whatever. And so this graded exposure, I think took the leap between, wait, okay, so what does that mean for my triggers though? Because I still had triggers. So that can't mean that it's not my trigger. And I really had a hard time making that leap. And then finally something clicked. I don't know. I heard so many different messages. What started to make sense to me, I think, is that the stress that I'm causing myself getting worked up about the trigger and this whole pain fear cycle, when I started learning about that, it was like, oh, okay, I see what my body and the mind body connection. I think that also was a big piece of this learning. As soon as I learned like the thoughts and the fears that you're having are creating these emotions within you that are creating physical effects in the body, and then it's cyclical, this whole thing going back and forth from the brain to the body to the brain. We're in fear over the trigger, we have the pain, and then we have more fear that it's going to happen again, and blah, blah, blah. Once I started learning all that about how to break that cycle, you calm the nervous system, and like you were saying, have more safety around these things. And I started experimenting. Oh, I know what it was too. The evidence list. Learning about that evidence list, and this goes into what people could do about it. And the third stage that I was going to talk about, but let me talk about it now while I'm thinking of it. is once I had learned about you start writing down the evidence that actually these things aren't your triggers and it's not happening every single time, then I started thinking, yeah, if there's a storm coming in and I'm only getting a migraine 1 out of every 5 storms, it can't be the barometric pressure. It can't be that. So I started getting very curious. Like, okay, well, I just had a bunch of chocolate and it didn't do it that time. So why, if that's my trigger, didn't it cause a problem? Or, all this stuff. So you start creating this evidence list and then just more and more and hearing other people on the different podcasts or in the Facebook groups and different places that were all curing from this pain. And I'm thinking, there's got to be something to it. There's too many people that are curing themselves of chronic pain. How can this, migraine's just another one of these symptoms. So yeah, I think it took me a while to make the leap, but all these different pieces of the puzzle started coming together. And I think I just experimented for a while. I didn't go right to the wine or perfume or some of these things that I was just so convinced that. I just did little things like some of the stuff that was out of my control, like the weather. It's coming or not, right? That's not in my control. So it's finding the evidence. Actually, no, it's not happening every time. That's not my trigger. And then really starting to work on my nervous system and the messages of safety that this isn't a problem. And I guess, too, I'm rambling now at this point, but also how powerful the brain is when I started learning about that. And I was convinced if I don't think it's a problem, it's not going to be a problem. So that's the nocebo effect. A placebo effect is when you are sure that it's going to work for you, a pill or a medication. And it actually does, even if it doesn't have the active ingredient in it. And then the nocebo effect is if you think something's going to negatively affect you, like one of the triggers, pretty likely that it is going to affect you negatively because you're so sure it is. So it works in both ways. Anyway, I just rambled about a lot of topics, but is there anything you want to add to that now? Did I spark something of you remembering how you found out or?
A lot of success stories. So mainly trying to look for migraine success stories and people saying, I had this trigger, I had that trigger, now I can do this, now I can do that. That was, oh, okay. And when you hear that enough times and you hear people have worked through the same or very similar problems, you think, well, maybe that could be like that for me as well. So yeah, I did listen to a lot of success stories. I've never, ever, ever done the evidence sheet.
No. I never wrote it down physically. I did it in my head more than anything.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, I just think, well, hang on. Even years ago, I remember not having a migraine on my period and thinking, that's weird. That's so weird that didn't happen. So even going back then, and now you know what you know about the mind-body connection, it's unbelievable to me that I was convinced that all of these things were out to get me. And the expanding list, can't do this, can't do that. And now I pretty much do whatever I want.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I first learned about this, I started trying to coach around it and was talking to one of my clients who always had a migraine every single time before her period. And I was saying, okay, let's try to have some strategies before your next cycle. When's your next cycle? We plan this thing all out. What could you do the week before to try to not have the fear-based thinking around it? So top down, and then how to make some decisions of, are there other stressors going on that week that you can maybe change some things around, and just all these different things, and the calming of the nervous system around it. And so we had this whole plan worked out, and she was super excited. She was very type A like I was, and I was trying to loosen her up. Like, okay, we're just curious about this time. It doesn't have to be like a set thing. We're just being curious around it. And so she had made a couple of decisions to not go to the gym where her daughter was playing basketball because she always thought that the sneaker smell and the loud sounds and everything was one of her triggers. So she was going to have her husband go pick the daughter up from the practice. And she was going to go out on a couple of nature walks and different things before the week. Anyway, she had to hydrate that week, and she had all these different strategies in place. And for the first time in I don't know how many years, I can't remember what she said, but it was like 20 20 some odd years that she didn't have before the menstrual cycle. I think I was more excited than she was because I was like, it works for other people. And, or I could teach this, we can figure this out. She was like, I just can't believe this. I feel so empowered now. And so she really started looking at it differently. And sometimes she does still, sometimes she doesn't, but it is more and more that she's not getting them around the cycle. So I think once you learn this, it's just so cool. But I think in that vein, it has to be approached in a very, I don't know if I want to say neutral way, but this way of just this curiosity, like I was saying, or this neutrality. If you're scared of something still and you try to do away with it, or you try it like a food or a wine or a perfume or whatever, and you still have that really big aversion to it, or the fear around it's not going to work. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. And if it does happen, just not to beat yourself up over that, because it might just be the fear and it might take a while for that fear to calm down. It doesn't mean it was that causing it, but you're always going to go back to that. You're always going to think it's that. Yeah, it's just to reassure yourself, give yourself a lot of reassurance that this isn't what's causing it. You know what's causing it, and we can, work through it. And if you do get the migraine, just to not react to it, just keep very calm and not overreact. So your brain isn't thinking, what is that? You can calm yourself down in other ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll have a lot of other episodes on that of how to calm the nervous system or this neutrality around the migraine. I like our discussion the other day when it was not this neutrality, but befriending the symptoms and be like, okay, you're back, let's work this out, because it is hard to be neutral about pain that you're in. There's different ways, different approaches that we'll talk about on the channel of how to manage this. If you could have 2 or 3 takeaways, what would you say?
Just to keep an open mind about your triggers. It's so hard when you've been led to believe that triggers are the reason for, or you believe it yourself, because belief is a strong thing. If you believe something, quite often is the case. So if you could switch your belief or just become curious about some of your triggers, try and keep an evident list or just a thought that if you don't experience a migraine, take note of that and think, well, if that can happen once, this could happen again, and try and switch your belief and become curious and just keep an open mind, because there's so much evidence out there that this is the case, that you can recover from thinking that your triggers are going to cause a migraine, because it isn't the case. And we're proof of that.
And many, many, many others, countless others that we're seeing. Yeah. Yeah. I came up with this thing recently of trying to train and teach people to look at triggers as 2 different things. So the external things that we're all thinking of, all the things we said at the beginning, the environment, the foods, the menstrual cycle, the weather, all these different things. Those are the external things, some in your control, some out. And to try to find this evidence list, whether you do it on paper or not, is sometimes they say it's good to see that. And as you gain this list, you really start saying oh my gosh, there's a lot of evidence that these are not my triggers. Sally and I both did it in our heads. So either way, I think works. And you don't want to get too caught up in being type A and trying to keep a list. And, that's the last thing you want. You want to just keep this neutral and curious and all this kind of stuff. But the other part of it is trying to find evidence that the internal things that are going on may be the cause. There might be a root cause of the internal things. So whether it's the stressors or the emotions that are going on around the time of the migraine, the dysregulation of the nervous system, I always try to look at it as the migraine day, a few days before, the day of, and a few days after. That it's a wide range, this window of time that you may be stressed about something and it comes. You might be in a moment where you're trying to avoid a situation, or it might be something coming up into the future that is in your brain that is causing this fear and something you don't want to do, or somewhere you don't want to go, or all these different fears that come in the stressors that are coming up. So to look at that and start then looking at the evidence of that, like, but okay, wait a minute. Yeah, I was very, very stressed, or I was really worried about this, and it came. And then you're going to start getting more evidence of this mind-body connection and this way of looking at migraine in a very different way of stress related, and this ability to dysregulate your nervous system and all the danger signals that are going to the brain and the brain science behind it. That's not what this episode is about, but we'll talk about that in future, of the brain science behind it and the neural pathways that it creates and why it becomes chronic and all these other things. Really, that second part, I wasn't looking at at all for 34 years, the internal stuff and trying to figure out what was going on internally and the emotional side and the stress side and the fear side when I was having migraines. I was just looking all at the external stuff.
The bottom line is it's all to do with fear, isn't it? Recovering from fear and the fear of the triggers, the fear of what's causing it, the fear of if you're ever going to get better, the fear of why am I like this, all of that. Once we learn to dial down the fear, which isn't easy, but trying to regulate our nervous system in various ways, everything settles down a bit more.
It's very normal to have the belief that these are the triggers because you do have evidence that they are, because it's happened every time, yet why it's happening is not the actual cause.
Yes. Well, once you change your mindset around that and you're curious to think, well, maybe it's not. And then you have a few more where it isn't. It's very strange when I look back on my journey. I don't remember these specific times of when I tried one thing and it was okay. It's just all of a sudden I just didn't consider my triggers to be triggers anymore. It's strange. It's hard to pinpoint that time of when I stopped saying, oh, I can't do this and I can't do that and I can't do the other. I remember I wasn't able to drive at night. That was just a huge one for me. I just couldn't drive at night with the lights in my eyes. And we went to a funeral and I had to drive home at night. And it was only when I was halfway home that I went, oh, I'm doing this thing that I always considered to be really bad. I wonder how I am tomorrow. And then I thought, why did I even think about it? And I just thought, no, I'm not going to listen to that voice. I'm going to carry on driving and I'm going to be absolutely fine. I can do this. And yeah, I was fine. So then I didn't consider that to be a trigger anymore. I can drive at night, fine. It was a good 20-minute journey and it did pop into my head, that little fear voice, but I was able to, no, I don't need to believe that, because the fear talking is just our brain's way of protecting us and not pre-warning us. And then the anxiety kicks in and then, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking about that, because I think it's a really, really important topic. And it's not one that I'm seeing talked about a lot on these other more broad mind, body, and chronic pain recovery type of sites. So this is part of, as you know, the reason why I do something migraine specific, because I think there's so many different nuances to migraine specifically. I don't know the only, but the one mind body symptom that is very heavily focused on triggers, and so many triggers that we have out there. So I really wanted to address that. And I think it's really important and a good stepping stone into trying to take this more neutral and a different approach. It can make such a huge difference in the amount of migraines that you have, and to start getting evidence that you're having less and to start feel better. I think we leave it there. I think that was good. I mean, well-rounded discussion. I think it hopefully gives people a bit of tools also of things of how to approach it in the future, why it's happening, that it's very normal to have the belief that these are the triggers, yet why it's happening is not actual. It's so clear that both of us had every single trigger that everybody else is going to come up with. And it's like, wait a minute, if they can not have that as a trigger anymore, huh? Like, how does that work? Maybe that could work for me. So I think it's such an important message. Yeah, definitely. So thank you so much for coming on and having a chat again. I'm going to, every chance I get, chat with Sally Tether.
Thanks for tuning in to the Migraine Oasis. I hope today's episode has inspired you to explore new approaches and provide some actionable steps you can use. Check out the show notes for any of the links of resources mentioned. If you found this valuable, please follow and subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others. This greatly helps our algorithm to ensure that this information gets out to more people who can benefit. If you're not already a part of the Migraine Oasis online community, check us out and stay tuned for more support, relief, and healing throughout the week. Until next time, stay hopeful and believe that more pain-free days are in your future. We're honored to support your healing journey. Take care of yourself and be well.